So it looks like we are 6 o'clock at this point, so I would like to call to order the 12th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of SAD 52, and I would also like to lead folks in the pledge. So join me. So our first order of business for this evening will be to act on the minutes of our 10th regular meeting, and that was February 17th. And before I double check with folks that those were without errors or omissions, I would like to welcome our new board member from Green, Kyle Burrington. Thanks for joining us, Kyle. Look forward to it. Back to those minutes, any errors or omissions on those? If not, we'll accept those under general consent. That brings us to communications. Kim.
Thank you. So I'd like to report the following resignations. Anthony Crosby, Tripp Middle School Special Education Ed Tech 3, because Anthony has accepted the Special Education Behavior Support Program teacher at Tripp Middle School. Also David Coburn, Leavitt Area High School JV Boys Basketball and halftime freshman football coach, which was effective February 25. And Sandra Decker-Bafuco, Leavitt Area High School Food Service Assistant, effective February 28. There's also a correction in the communications from the board meeting on February 17th. Chris Marston resigned as Leavitt Area High School's JV baseball coach and not Leavitt Area High School's varsity girls basketball coach.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 4, and that is the budget work session. So when we think about the process for budget consideration, I just remind folks that what we'll be doing this evening is considering warrant article 1 and warrant article 2. We had the various directors share their executive summaries at our last meeting that was February 17th. And board members had the opportunity to receive their books that have detailed information about every area of the budget. This evening we'll have folks have that opportunity again. Superintendent Brandt will give us the overview. Administrators will have the ability to address those overview type areas again, and then board members will review the warrant articles line by line and have the opportunity to ask any questions if they so desire. And a reminder for board members, if there are items that there's a desire for additional information or additional discussion that folks would like to see on our revisit list, please do make a motion and a second to put it on that list. Kim and I will keep track of that list and we'll make sure that everybody's clear on what we will be following up on that one. So with that, I would turn it over to Kim.
Thank you. So, every school budget is built on several items, including the MSAD 52 mission, strategic plan, the needs of our students academically, socially, emotionally, and physical needs as well. Also on non-academic necessities such as providing safe transportation and maintaining facilities. We have to consider the rising costs of goods and services and enrollment in class sizes as well. We have contractual obligations, and about 80% of any school budget reflects the cost of its employees. And from year to year, we generally have changes in state subsidy. This year, our state subsidy has increased from last year by $1.1 million, which is good news. For this current year, we did some prepaids of about $600,000. They need to go back into the budget for FY23. The board also needs to consider a carry forward amount from year to year, and we are recommending that that carry forward amount be the same as it was for this current year at $555,000. The board will also need to consider if they want to add some additional funds to the technology reserve, because we used a lot of the federal emergency funding to buy devices for all students and upgrade ones for teachers. In about 5 years, those will start needing to be replaced. We started a federal or a technology reserve in the last budget season. We added a little to that when we received the additional unanticipated subsidy. So do we want to add more? Does the board want to add more? The board would also like to consider if they want to add any additional money to the facilities reserve. We always have maintenance and upkeep things that happen every year, so that should be a discussion. The initial proposed budget that we did on February 17th reflects an overall tax impact to the communities of 3.8%. At this point, we're going to go through warrant Article 1, which is regular instruction, and what will happen is that principals and directors will answer questions about their schools, as the board has them when you do the line by line.
Thank you. And I think we had some where's Dean's hiding now at the end of the table where he can be a resource for us. The handouts for board members for this evening were updates to previous information that we had, or this is to replace? Okay. So the updated information includes executive summaries as well as individual proposal information. So that's a lot of background on the budget. So we'll start in with warrant Article 1, page 1. And remember, if board members have questions on items on each of these pages, please do raise your hand and I will recognize you. Questions on page 1. And as folks are looking through their budget books, this is page 1 of 14 in warrant Article 1. And warrant Article 1 is regular instruction, just in case. If there's nothing on page 1, we'll continue to page 2. Questions on page 2. So one question that I had that maybe folks could, whether Kim or Teresa wants to refresh us on, I know there's one item that shows up for each of the schools, and that is field trip. Transportation actually shows up on page 2, transportation for field trips. If you could remind us on those increases that we'll see throughout this warrant article.
Yes, so last year we were not taking field trips like we would normally do due to the pandemic. So this year, our hope is that for next year, we will be able to get back to taking field trips. So you will see $100 per classroom and then the same amount for the transportation.
Thank you. Other questions on page 2? If not, moving on to page 3. Yuri.
Second line is the reflective position.
Second line, so that would be TES, regular instruction, ed tech salaries. And the question was, is that reflective of an additional position?
Yes. Yes, it does. That is one of the positions that we are requesting in the FY23 budget, and that is for ed tech, and that is to support student behavior and mental health needs.
Thank you. Other questions on page 3? If there are no other questions on page 3, move on to page 4. Questions on page 4? Yuri.
On the very last line, that's not reflective of a new position. What changed there? GCS regular instruction.
So the question is GCS regular instruction teacher salaries?
Yes, so Dean, I'll start and then you can finish up. So that would represent an increase, but also there was a teacher who left and a new teacher who came on at a less salary because they were less experienced.
So, and just to refresh for board members and as folks follow along at home as well, any of the salary lines and the benefit lines do reflect current staffing and when I say current staffing, I mean current staff who are employed by the district. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. Thank you. Anything else on page 4?
Yes.
Joanne?
Line 2700, student transport service. Oh, it's a purchase, okay. I was wondering if field trips were bringing it up, but if it's a purchase, that explains the increase.
So is that clear that you kind of answered your own question?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think I answered my own question.
Thank you. Anything else on page 4? If not, moving on to page 5. Questions on page 5? Yuri?
Can you remind us what we're using for our baseline for insurance increases until we get the actual figure?
Dean, I think the question was, can you remind us what we're using as a placeholder, understanding that we don't have the actual insurance rate increase or decrease at this point?
Yes, we budgeted a 10%.
So 10% increase is what we budgeted. And we will, Dean, if I remember correctly, we will most likely have those actual numbers prior to the point where we approve a final budget, correct? Thank you. Other questions on page 5? If there are no questions on page 5, we'll move on to page 6. Questions on page 6? If there are no questions on page 6, we'll move on to page Richard.
Line 5210 on the music teacher benefits.
There's a 177% increase.
Yes, that is the teacher who's now taking the teacher that's what? Taking the
Thank you.
So that's just one person? Yes.
Other questions on page 6? If not, moving on to page 7. Questions on page 7? Any questions on page 7? If not, we'll move on to page 8. Questions on page 8? In page 8, I know I haven't described what the other pages were before. Page 8, we're looking at Leeds Central School. Any questions on page 8? If not, we'll move on to page 9. And page 9 moves us into Tripp Middle School territory. Fury.
How many non-filled teaching positions do we have in Trip now?
The question was, how many unfilled teaching positions do we have at Tripp currently? Jana, 0. Thank you. Other questions on page 9? If there are no other questions on page 9, we'll move on to page 10. Page 10 is still Tripp Middle School. Questions on page 10? If there are no questions on page 10, we'll move on to page 11. Yuri.
Line 51, 500, the increase in stipends, was that right?
And the question was 51,500 regular instruction stipends.
So that increase, Yuri, is actually, needs to be updated. It's going to be a zero increase because the additional funds are going to cover the grant fund.
So what I understood Mr. Shaw to indicate just now is that would actually, instead of an increase, that will be nothing for an increase, is that? Thank you. And that is because just to make sure everybody hears that, and that adjustment is because of?
We're utilizing the grant fund.
Thank you. So because of grant funds, that is not an increase that we will see there. Other questions on page 11? If there are no other questions on page 11, moving to page 12. Page 12 is still Levitt Area High School. Questions on page 12? If there are no questions on page 12, we'll move on to page 13. Page 13 is still Levitt Area High School. Questions on page 13? Yuri.
Can we just let everybody know what the increase is in science and technology equipment? On line 57,300.
Line 57,300 is an increase of $11,660, and that increase is due to,
Do you want to email you?
I am used to being yelled at, so you could do that if you want, or you can use the mic, that's either way. I won't have to repeat it and bungle it if you use the mic and we do it once.
I'll use the mic. It's just easier that way. The increase in equipment is for basically two things. For the last couple of years, I've spoken about the surface planer in the wood shop. That is one of the items. And the other item is some additional or updated robotics equipment for the robotics lab.
So surface planer and robotics equipment.
Correct.
Thank you. Other questions for page 13? If there are no other questions on page 13, we'll move on to page 14 of 14. Questions on page 14? Any questions on page 14? If not, we will move to gifted and talented, which is separated in the book by being the different orientation. So, thank you. Starting on page 1 of 2 in gifted and talented. Questions on that one? Richard.
Do those figures reflect the hiring of a new gifted and talented person? Or part-time, I guess it is.
Teresa.
It should. The plan is, as proposed, that an Ed Tech 3 position is eliminated and a teacher position is added, and the difference is about just under $16,000. And the reason you see lines going up and down is because they're district-wide employees. They go where the students are. So some years it shifts.
So it's not unusual for those lines to look pretty different from year to year, just based on where those students happen to be
That is
located.
correct.
Thank you. Other questions on page 1 of gifted and talented? If there are no other questions there, we'll move to page 2 of gifted and talented. Questions on page 2? So Teresa, I guess this would be what, that increase or decrease should show the difference between the ed tech 3 to a teacher, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Questions on page 2? Richard?
So I noticed that the staff training has been eliminated. I would ask why.
We've been paying for staff training with grant funds.
Okay.
So that's line 53300. So that's not 2 lines. So that doesn't mean that that training's not happening, it just means that we're funding it through grants.
No, I'm looking, if you go down and see where it is below, again, that's also a reduction under 5, but under the K to 8, because they'll be paid for out of grant funds. We're not eliminating the training.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on page 2 of gifted and talented? If not, we'd move on to ELL instruction. Page 1 of 2 in ELL instruction. Teresa, is this an area where we would see something similar to what we see in GT, in that this is a district-wide position, so the allocations per school may change year to year based on where the need is?
Yes, there's no increase for positions or even time in this particular area. We currently have one ELL teacher who works 2 full days and one who works 4 days, and they cover up to 6 schools. That's where the qualifying students are.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 1? If not, we'll move on to page 2. Questions on page 2? If there are. Richard?
Approximately how many students do we have getting ELL instruction?
I will have to look it up. Initially, I would say 20, but I think it may be slightly lower than that. It can really vary. For example, at the beginning of the year, we added 2 students that we weren't planning on. It really can change. We did have some students who were due to come from Ukraine. They are not able to join us at this time. So it really can vary. It's right around 20. But with the 2 teachers we have, I feel confident that we can deliver the instruction. They take what's called an access test every year to determine their level of needs, and then individual plans are written from them to help them access the language so that they can learn.
Thank you.
Are folks able to hear Teresa when she's answering questions, or do we need to hunt down a microphone over there? Yes, maybe?
We can hear,
Sort of.
yes, we can hear.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So that brings us to the close of warrant article 1. Unless there are any other lingering questions on warrant article 1. That brings us to warrant Article 2, and that is special education.
Hi, good evening. Before we start, I do have some data to share with the board. I just feel it's a good time to share.
Closer to the
what our
microphone,
numbers are.
please. That would be an even better assist. Thank you.
It's on? It's on. Yes.
That worked. Thank you.
Okay. So before we start, I do have some data I just wanted to pass. So in the past few years, I've done a presentation, but this evening I think it's probably most crucial just to get you the data and the information for students.
Richard's telling me he's still having trouble hearing you.
You're still having trouble? Okay. Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see if I can look and hold this up at the same time. I think I can. So in the last several years, I've done a presentation regarding special education and the cost and the number of students and needs that we have. I think it's most crucial for you to have the information before reviewing this. The first, I have a couple of graphs on 2 pages. The first page at the front is the warrant Article 2 budget, and it looks at the graph over time from the start of 17 to 18 up to what we're looking at is 22, 23 proposals. So you can see how, based on our needs, our costs increase and decrease over time. The next graph that I have for you is the referrals. That's one way, other than students moving in with an individualized plan, students enter the special education services. And you can see some of the pattern. I think our averages usually about what we had seen in the year 18-19 and 19-20. And I think we're going to hit that average again this year, which is just under 40 students. It's anywhere between 20 to 40, landing at about 30 students. On the back, another way students leave special education is they either are dismissed to regular education, they move out of the district, or they graduate. So here's some information for you, and looking at our numbers from last year, 20 to 2021. And then every year on October 1st, we approve a child count, which is the number of students with individual plans. And so this year, we were at 350 students. And we anticipate next year to be 358 or a little bit higher. And you can see the patterns over time.
Any questions from board members on this? Thank you for updating us on that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Those details before we get started on this one. And probably, given that we have some new board members as well, maybe just a quick reminder for folks that not all of our funding for special education comes from the local budget.
Yes.
And I know that's a gross oversimplification, but that's...
So we also have to supplement the budget, certainly not, we cannot supplant, but to supplement the budget, we have a local entitlement grant. If we follow the federal guidelines under IDA, then we can access funding from the federal government that comes through a grant process from the state. So we have that, and that pays for a few of our positions. It pays for all, you'll notice I don't have a lot of money in here. We don't in our department for trainings, because we use that money for trainings, we use that money for student material, and also student equipment, which are all very individualized to what our students need.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Page 1 of 10. Questions on page 1. And page 1 starts at Turner Primary School. Questions on page 1? If not, we'll move on to page 2. Questions on page 2. Page 2 brings us into Tripp Middle School. Questions on page 2? If there are no questions on page 2, we move to page 3. Questions on page 3? Yuri?
At the primary school, the ed tech salaries, I'm assuming that is reflected in one of the increased positions that you're requesting. Line 51020 under TPS.
All right, so page 2 of 10?
3 of 10, sorry.
3 of 10, thank
And,
you.
and the line number is, the last 5 digits are 51020, and it's one where we see an increase.
Well, it's interesting that you point that out, because as Dean and I were looking through this, I had, so 2 things. At the end of every school year, we reassess our needs district-wide based on the numbers and the students that we know at the time, and we move them to different schools and transfer them to be able to cover our needs. So actually, that's representative of transfers that I have transferred to TPS. The 2 positions that you're talking about are on, that we had mentioned, are on actually page 2. I believe they're misplaced on page 2, and Dean's working on that. Those are the 2 ed tech positions. One is to go to TPS, and one is to go to TES for self-contained. I'm glad you brought that up so I could explain that.
So, to that figure that shows in TPS, just to make sure we all understand this, in that TPS 51020, that's actually not exactly the right place for it. That should be in, if I'm understanding what you're saying, that should be elsewhere? Or is that correct there?
Yes, on page 2, the 51020 for elementary, that should be placed, one of those positions should be placed at TPS in self-contained, and the other one should be placed at TES for self-contained. The increase that Yuri had mentioned on page 3 is ed techs that I have moved to that school. So that's why you'll see a decrease in some lines and increase in others, because we shifted staff around.
So that may not be a net increase, that is just an increase in that particular school to meet the specific needs of that school.
Yes.
Thank you. Other questions on page 3 for Rebecca? Questions on page 3? If not, moving on to page 4. Questions on page 4? Richard?
So that explains the reduction on page 4 in line 5220, 52020.
So 52020 is a benefit line.
So I think, Dean, do you want to answer that question?
I do believe that is the result of the transfer.
You would anticipate if you're transferring people that benefits would increase, but I think it was benefits decreased due to individuals not taking those benefits at the school.
Thank you. Other questions on page 4? Questions on page 4? If not, moving on to page 5. Questions on page 5? Question on K to 8, and the line number is 55630, and I think that's out of district placements. Is that reflective of an increase there? And the second part of the question is, does it relate to 55630, 9 to 12 secondary, a reduction there, or do they just happen to happen?
I know, it was nice that that happened that way this year. We have 12, that represents at K-8, 12 students, at 9, 12, 6 students. So we've had an increase with our younger students in special purpose private programming and a decrease at the high school for special purpose private programming.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Other questions on page 5? If there are no questions on page 5, moving on to page 6. Questions on page 6. If there are no questions on page 6, move on to page 7. Questions on page 7. Any questions on page 7? If not, we'll move on to page 8 and page 8. Questions on page 8. Page 8, K to 8, 51060 and 52060. That's an increase of a position there, or that, and that is psych services?
Yes, so it's moving from psych services from contracting below a part-time position to increasing that to a full-time position. So what we would have is we would have a full-time psych, school psych at the elementary, and then we'd have a full, I'd say, I think it's, an 80 or 90% of a school psych at the elementary, and then the rest would be at the high school. So that's why you'd see the increase below or decrease out of the contract services, and then the lines for the school psych salary and benefits.
Thank you. Other questions on page 8? If there are not any other questions on page 8, move on to page 9. Questions on page 9? Any questions on page 9? If not, moving on to page 10. Questions on page 10? Yuri?
Line 5160, that represented more coverage for additional days.
51060 on K to 8, and that is physical therapist.
I'm gonna look to Dean. We have a part-time physical therapist that works within our system.
That is an increase in hours.
Increase in hours. Okay.
Thank you. Other questions on page 10? If not, that concludes our review of Warrant Article 2, Special Education. At this time, just to summarize, there are no items that have been moved to a revisit list on either of these warrant articles. So for our next meeting, the warrant articles that we'll be covering, Kim, are, drum roll please.
Yes, March 10th, we will do warrant Article 8, which is transportation, warrant Article 9, facilities maintenance, warrant Article 10, debt service, and warrant Article 14, food service.
So that's transportation, facilities, debt service, and food service on the 10th. Thank you. So that brings us to adjustments to the agenda. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, Betsy. I would like to ask that we move item 10.3, which is discussion of MSAD 52's COVID-19 plan, before public comment.
Any objections from board members to moving that particular agenda item to precede public comment? If not, that seems like a good change. Thank you. That brings us to committee reports. Finance, Yuri. Not met. PTV did meet. In fact, the weather cooperated this time, so the committee was able to meet at the middle school this afternoon and learn a bit more about the kitchen and cafeteria potential project. Dean also, business manager Flanagan, also invited folks from Siemens to join us, as the Siemens company has assisted the district in all the technical aspects of our performance contracting projects, both of phase 1 and phase 2 of projects, and have also helped us, again, with technical aspects of characterizing lots of different projects within the district, including the kind of initial mock-ups of a change to the middle school cafeteria and kitchen. And I think for historical perspective, I'm not going to show my age at all and suggest that I remember what that kitchen and cafeteria have looked like for more than a day or two here, but my understanding is that initially that was designed as not a full scratch cooking area and more of a reheat and serve kind of set of stations. So it has remained as that over time for, again, more than a day or two, I think. So the concerns that have been raised are certainly that this is logistically challenging in that space, both in the amount of space and the ability of our staff to scratch cook there and to utilize some various changes in the food service world that are focusing more on trying to utilize some local ingredients and local foods. So that was the basis for some of that discussion. The Siemens folks and Dean provided committee members with some relatively detailed drawings that have some details that are small enough that I am reminded that bifocals are in my future. Dean also provided the committee with a refreshed look at the various projects that are outstanding that we have not funded, either by going to bond or by inclusion in our annual budgets over the last long time, I think. And they include items such as a resurface on the track, various iterations of consideration around football and softball field rebuilds, paving at the high school, stair treads, refinish a gym floor, scoreboard, the cafeteria expansion refurbish that was discussed, a roof at TES, and various other paving and drainage improvements for a ballpark figure of approximately $4.5 million. So given that that's not a small number, the feeling within the group was certainly that this is a great first step to at least begin to get a handle on what that list looks like. More work needs to be done, both with that subcommittee and with the full board and folks in each of our schools to make sure that that list is in fact comprehensive and that we have details moving forward as to what the best plan of attack might be on those things. The folks from Siemens did share some rather encouraging news in that some of the infrastructure funds that have passed on a federal level will have some grant possibilities that may offer some opportunities especially given our performance contracting work and the history that we have around characterizing these projects and getting them from start to finish. So that work will be ongoing, so we'll expect to have some additional reporting out on exactly what those projects looked like and exactly what board members' preferences might be as far as our ability to fund those over time. So stay tuned on that one. Curriculum policy, Joanne.
We have not met.
Student representative, Tristan, would you like you can pass the microphone down here.
Thank you. All right, as was predicted in the previous student report in February, the Winter Carnival was very successful with senior class winning the competition. On another note, National Honor Society currently has plans underway for the induction of new members to the society. Also, a meeting on the event will be held tomorrow in the high school. That includes student representatives report.
Thank you. Administrators' reports, we do not have separate reports this evening. That brings us to the superintendent's report. Kim.
So Betsy, the superintendent's report tonight is going to be the beginning part of the discussion of 10.3.
So if anyone's making notes on their agenda, we should consider that we are now moving to 10.3. Is that accurate? And item
Yes.
10.3 is discussion of the MSAD 52 COVID-19 plan.
Okay. So throughout the pandemic, I have consistently recommended aligning with the CDC guidance and the DOE standard operating procedures.
Can everybody hear?
What's that?
Richard can't hear, so he's my barometer. If he can't hear, I'm going to assume that there are other folks out there who are also unable to hear.
I'll start over.
Thank you.
Throughout the pandemic, I have consistently recommended aligning with the CDC guidance and recommendations and the Department of Education standard operating procedures. Yesterday, new guidance related to masking in schools emerged. Governor Mills, the Maine CDC, the Maine Department of Health and Human Services, and the Maine Department of Education are no longer recommending masking indoors in schools beginning on March 9. This change is dependent on continued stability in COVID-19 trends. This is a complex issue. There are families and staff who are very concerned about universal masking, and there are families and staff who are very concerned about optional masking. I will continue to report out on our district's COVID-19 related data, including numbers of positive cases, should any school reach outbreak status, which is defined as 15% or more of students and or staff out on a single day, with a majority of those absences due to COVID-19 illness, and on vaccination rates, as I've done all year. I will also add how many positive pools we have in each school. And now, starting next week, I'll be reporting out on hospitalization rates provided by the CDC and on wastewater sampling provided by the state of Maine. Should this data indicate that a more restrictive measure or measures must be considered, the school board will determine the safest response. The district will continue to follow the SOPs related to positive COVID-19 cases. So the data related to COVID for this week. Androscoggin County remains in high. The number of MSAD 52 students who are vaccinated remains at 50 to 54%. Vaccination rate by town, green, that remains at 64%. Vaccination rate by leads remains at 62%. Vaccination rate by Turner is at 66%. It was 65% at our last board meeting. The number of positive cases since our last board meeting on February 17th at Green Central School are 7, and it was 8 the previous 2 weeks. The number of positive cases in Leeds Central School, 5, and that compared to 8 the previous 2 weeks. The number of positive cases at Turner Primary School are 2, and that compared to 15 the previous 2 weeks. The number of positive cases at Turner Elementary School are 0, and that compared to 2 the previous 2 weeks. The number of positive cases at Tripp Middle School are 2, compared to 5 the previous 2 weeks. And the number of positive cases at the high school are 2, compared to 10 the previous 2 weeks. For pooled testing, we'll start with Green Central School. They have between 15 and 17 pools each week. For this week's pool, they had 1 positive pool out of that 15 to 17, and they had no results from that. On February 14th, they had 1 positive pool, and on January 31st, they had 4 positive pools. Leeds Central School has between 6 and 8 pools. For this week, they had 1 positive pool. For the week of February 14, they had 0 positive pools. They had 2 positive pools on the week of February 7, and they had 0 positive pools on the week of January 31. Turner Primary School has 18 pools. For this week, they had 1 positive pool. The week of February 14th, they had 4 positive pools. The week of February 7th, they had 3 positive pools. And the week of January 31, they had 2 positive pools. For Turner Elementary School, 6 pools. This week, they had 1 positive pool. February 14 week, 1 positive pool. January 31st, they had 3 positive pools. Tripp Middle School has 8 to 9 pools each week. This week, 2 positive pools. Week of February 14, 0 positive pools. Week of January 31, 1 positive pool. And at Leavitt Area High School, they have 10 to 11 pools. This week, they had 0 positive pools. Week of February 14, 0 positive pools. Week of February 7, 1 positive pool. And week of January 31, 1 positive pool. So Betsy, I don't know if you want to discuss, if you want my recommendation.
So your recommendation at this point, given the changing guidance from Augusta?
Yeah. So I have been consistent throughout in recommending what the CDC has recommended. The CDC in Maine, as long as all the other bodies, are now recommending optional masking starting on March 9th. So I'm continuing to align with that guidance, and I recommend that we follow the new Maine CDC, DOE, and DHHS guidance to make masking optional beginning on March 9th.
Given that this will be a change in our practice, would it be in the interest of clarity for there to be a motion from the board? I would entertain a motion from the board. Jessica?
So I would make a motion that we follow Kimberly Grant's recommendation. Is there any reason that we can't look at it and start right away? Versus waiting until Monday? Is that what we could do anything? I'm sorry.
Teresa.
I'm unable to hear. Sorry.
Yeah, so Jessica's making a motion, and I'm uncertain what the motion is.
Can you hand her the microphone so we can hear her?
Sorry. I'm
Absolutely.
late.
Oh, no, we're way ahead of me.
So I was just asking.
It's not on.
Hello?
Can you hear me now? So I was just asking, is there, so if I understand correctly, Maine DOE is saying the 9th, CDC is saying effective yesterday. Is that correct?
So the notice that came out yesterday referred to optional masking beginning on Wednesday, March 9th.
So my motion is going to be So I was hoping we could align with the CDC. So my motion would be that we would be effective immediately, that would be optional masking, but still
No,
following.
It's not a theatrical production here.
But still following the recommendation for recommended masking, because I think that was the caveat.
So the motion on the table is to begin optional masking immediately? Is that the motion? Do we have a second for that? So the motion is to,
So the change is we've had a mandatory, right, versus a recommendation. So now we're shifting to a recommendation.
do we have a second for that?
Yes.
And the second from Richard. Discussion from folks? I guess I'm wondering in practice what that would look like.
You'll go to school with a mask tomorrow.
Folks, I didn't actually ask for commentary at this point. The discussion is amongst board members as far as the motion that's on the table. You'll have your opportunity in public comment.
So if somebody wants to make something that sounds a bit more clear, that's fine.
So I just want to make sure that I'm capturing the intent of the motion. So the motion was to move to optional masking, correct? And the date.
Are we still able to say that we're, because I wanted to be very clear that we're still following CDC guidelines, which at this point we're in high transmission, so it's still a recommendation. It's just no longer a mandate. Does that make sense?
Kim, does that make sense?
I can't hear. I can't hear.
Sorry about that on the microphone.
So CDC guidelines are saying it's not a mandatory masking, but it's still a recommendation because we're in a high transmission, correct?
No, what they said yesterday, March 2nd, was that the recommendation for schools to have masking indoors is no longer, they're no longer recommending masking indoors in schools, effective March 9th.
So is
So
that,
there has never been, there was a mask mandate during the civil state of emergency, and then after that, it was a recommendation that we chose to follow.
Mhm.
Now, they're saying there's no more recommendation to mask in schools, it's an option.
Okay.
Does that help with your
Yeah.
motion?
You said what the federal guidelines were versus the main guidelines were.
So just to restate the motion again. So your motion is to go to optional masking as of the date that the main CDC is suggesting, or as of immediately? Immediately. So the motion is to go to optional masking immediately, and the second from Richard. Other discussion from board members? Oh, Richard.
Assuming that we would, as many of the other towns have, give the superintendent the authority to change that if the conditions worsen.
So, you want me to respond, Betsy?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what has happened is things have been moving very quickly, and there have been some districts that in this past week have started making some recommendations before we got the official word from the main CDC yesterday. And so I believe their boards gave them the authority to change, knowing that there's a chance that official word was going to be coming out. And now the official word is out. I would, Richard, to get to your point though, I'm going to be monitoring the data, monitoring the hospitalizations, like all the things that they're telling us we have to look at, and I'll be reporting those to the board. Because they've been very clear that if things change, then the board will need to respond safely to that.
So, Joanne?
Well, I guess my question becomes, I'm not sure I would want to leave that to the superintendent. Are you expecting any further
information from CDC to help make a different decision if a different decision were going to be made?
So information has been evolving like this entire time, right? We can never quite predict when something else will happen. This is a big change in what the recommendation has been. It is a very big change. So I believe that we're going to go forward, the CDC is going to go forward with this. If we get, if the newest variant turns into something worse than they're predicting, and we start having high numbers of cases and outbreaks and things like that, then the board would need to revisit and say, here's what the data says, how do we respond safely?
Other discussion from board members? So here's a semi-practical question. What does this look like in the schools if, from a practice standpoint, because clearly based on what some of the medical advice continues to be, there are folks in our school communities who will believe that wearing masks is the right choice for them moving forward. Okay, folks, you will have an opportunity to speak in public comment. This is certainly not adding to the discussion to have chatter in the background. So from a practical standpoint, I would hope, given the number of comments that we've had around mental health and bullying in recent months, that we would ensure that our schools are places where folks who elect to wear masks will be free to do so without harassment. Is that something that seems like it could be accurate? I'm seeing lots of head nodding, which is certainly encouraging. Kim?
Yes, okay. So so what we'll do is we'll still follow the standard operating procedures around a positive COVID case, because that's about keeping people safe. So we will follow those. Student, staff, and people who are representing the district who go to or extracurricular activities will follow whatever requirements are in place at the venue where we're visiting. So if we go to a museum trip and the museum is saying, well, we're asking everybody to mask, then we would mask on that field trip, right? So we'll be respectful of wherever we're going. MSAD 52, depending on what the board decides tonight, would support the choice for masking if that's where you go. Masks will be available upon request. We will expect those people who either are protecting loved ones at home, who maybe are in a higher risk area, or who are themselves immunocompromised, we would encourage them, we want them to wear masks to be as safe and healthy as they possibly can. And we certainly would expect everyone to be respectful of each person's choice, whether that choice were to be to mask or not to mask. Pooled testing will stay in place at this time because that is an effective way to discover people who are carrying the virus but are asymptomatic, so we can find it out before there is spread from them. And we'll continue to monitor that data. And again, Dr. Shaw had mentioned, CDC had mentioned, check the hospitalization rates. We can find that through CDC. And State of Maine does the wastewater sampling, which is another indicator, as well as numbers of cases in our own schools. So we would watch that. We would continue to ask everyone to do the health assessment every day. If you have symptoms, please stay home, right? We're trending well. We want to keep trending well. That will work if everybody pitches in and does their part. So if you have symptoms, stay home, please. Also, please let your school nurse know if there are any positive cases in the home. Okay? Of course, they'll continue to have the hand sanitization will be in place. We will keep the physical distancing as much as possible in our classrooms and our cafeterias as well.
My understanding earlier was that the transportation parameters around masking are federal, not state or local. Is that correct?
That is correct, Betsy, and that had been in effect until March 18th, but that changed for school transportation, for school buses and vans, as of February 25th.
So to be clear, if the board elects to go with optional masking, that extends to our transportation as well?
It can now, because that federal law has been pulled back. It was supposed to be through March 18th. Now it ended for school transportation on February 25th.
So is that something that we need to make some sort of take some sort of separate action on, or would that, I guess my question is, would that follow under the umbrella of whatever action is taken here?
I think because that law is no longer in place for buses and vans, that whatever action the board takes around continued universal masking or optional masking would follow with the transportation for school.
Thank you. Other questions from folks on what's being proposed? And Mr. Childs.
So the politicians in the White House position relinquished their mask mandate so they could all, well, for the State of the Union the other day, so they didn't really, it was optional for them. So I think if our great politicians and then people can do it, we can let our kids breathe freely, please.
Yeah.
It's just
Other
like
questions
2 or 3 days extra.
or discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion on the table? Those opposed? The motion carries. So I presume at this point, Superintendent Brandt, you've done a number of different communication pieces out to our school community. You will do the same with this change.
So tomorrow morning, I will send out another MSAD 52 update that describes what the board action is and what that's going to look like in our schools.
Thank you. That brings us to public comment. Do we have folks who are interested in commenting? And I'll remind you of the process. If you would please come to the microphone, introduce yourself. A reminder, there's a 5-minute limit on any one speaker. And I will also remind you that would not be allowed any personal attacks on any person, nor is this the place for discussion of things that don't directly pertain to the school operations. I'm obviously paraphrasing. There are some folks that are here this evening that have heard me read that policy a number of times, so I thought I'd save a little time on that. All right. Would you like to begin?
And that's who we are, right? Jeff Markey, Turner, resident and parent of 4 children at the various schools. I'm here tonight, had nothing to do with masking anyway, but it does touch on something that the chair had mentioned is relating to the mask optional or not, and how we treat those who decide that they still want to wear them, specifically the topic of bullying. For some of you, you've been on this board, you've seen me here before a couple of times. For others, I will again remind you a little bit of my backstory. I have 4 children, as I stated, one of whom has, going back 3 years, been repeatedly bullied by the same individual, the same child. A couple of years ago, the solution was we would get through the end of the school year, and then the following year they were not being in the same class. That happened. It happened to be 2019-2020 school year, so the first half of the year was great. They weren't around one another, no problems, and of course, we all know we went remote, and so that really didn't come into play. Fast forward into the returning school year, and not only were they put in the same group, they were put in the same class. I immediately questioned this and asked them to fix the problem, knowing that they had made a mistake, and the school administrators and principal informed me that there was nothing they could do. The options were to now trust that they were going to take care of the problem, even though the problem wasn't handled originally, or that we move my son. Now, before I went down this road, talking to the administrators, talking to the teachers and the principal, I asked my son if that would be an acceptable option for him. And as a 4th grader, he was able to decipher that, Dad, that wasn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I moving my classes around? I couldn't argue with that. It made perfect sense, and I had questions as to why grown adults couldn't come to the same realization. So again, I pleaded and pleaded and pleaded, and we went through rounds and rounds. of emails. Some of them responded to, some not, which is a whole other issue I have. And ultimately had some conversations with Ms. Marston, who was agreeable to keeping a better eye on the individual student. I was assured that the student would be watched more closely, wouldn't be allowed to do different recess things, transportation from classroom to classroom would be watched better so that my son wouldn't be involved in any more bullying. Here we are. You can imagine and connect the dots on what happened. So I'm going to read an email. I went back and forth with some emails with Ms. Gillis, Ms. Marston. I was sure to copy Ms. Brandt, as well as my son's teachers. And after a few different iterations, I had long conversations with Ms. Gillis. I thank her for reaching out. We had a very frank and blunt conversation. She listened to what I had to say, even when I didn't agree with everything she said. It was a respectful conversation. I thank her for that. I then did get a call back from Ms. Marston upon her return. I had a similar conversation with her, and my email is as follows. She asked, Ms. Gillis pointed out that she was back and asked if she had reached out to me. And I said that, hello, Ms. Gillis. Yes, she did reach out today, and we had a rather lengthy and blunt conversation. Much the same way I expressed my feelings to you about this district's handling of the persistent bullying issue with you, I again addressed them with Ms. Marston. As I said to you, I also stated to her, I've reached the point of I really don't care who at the administration I offend with voicing my concerns. We're at this point because of the inaction of MSAD 52. Staff admitted as much on how they acknowledged the ball was dropped by placing the other student with our son in the same class again this year. Even after admitting it, all anyone has offered to do is suggest moving my son. Even he is able to determine how this is unfair and lacks any common sense justification, or make promises of how things will be better moving forward. Well, here we are again, and no, they are not better. All I hear is how people see my son struggling and trying to keep him engaged and working to help him. Yes, he is currently all of those things, 100% because of the lack of true and effective actions of this administration. You are failing our son and many more like him in this district. The problem is, it seems to me, nobody wants to dig deep enough to see the entire picture. It seems you all want to believe your written policy works and handles everything just perfectly. It does not. It does not when you have students like our son and others who have stopped reporting things to you because by their own admission they feel nobody listens and nothing changes. Actual words from my son on numerous occasions. That makes me want to cry and gets my blood boiling all at the same time. I would have hoped you would have had the same reaction. Today my son was placed on the same team as the other student in gym class. A class of 11 students and 2 teachers according to Ms. Marston. Seemingly not enough to keep an eye on the other student directly. The issue here is that was the last promise and compromise I was given back in the fall when Ms. Marston and I last spoke in person, not counting teacher conferences. I was assured that he would be granted direct watch and away from my son. Somebody please explain to me how we go from that to not only in a class together without that added and direct supervision to being placed on the exact same team in gym class. Again, I'm sorry, not sorry, what might seem as an angry tone, I assure you, I am beyond angry at this point. What on earth do we have to do to get this district to make changes? The other students' behavior...
We're well over 5 minutes.
That's fine.
Now.
The other students...
I think that...
So, and I've asked...
I've asked all speakers... That's not a thing. So I've asked all speakers to...
Okay, but I asked this numerous times, and I emailed and asked you guys about doing a survey to try to get the true prevalence of the problem with bullying. We've received numerous surveys on masking, what we want in a new superintendent. I've gone through every channel this district has, from guidance counselors to teachers to principals to superintendents who don't respond to me to assistant
I'm going to reiterate that we're not going to go for the personal attacks.
Why do we not do it?
We could do that in lots of other venues in life. That's
so
definitely...
You responded to my email about the survey, right?
This is also not a forum for debate. I think
it's not a debate. I asked you a question.
Indicated...
I asked you a question, though. You got my email because you responded, right?
I'm going to insist that you not interrupt me either, or I'm going to ask you to take your seat. Those are the options, basically. I think you'll be pleased to hear that board members and certainly administrators are interested in continued conversations around bullying, and that there will be additional discussion on our March 10th meeting agenda for each administrator to describe in additional detail the various steps that are going on in their school. If you'll remember, Assistant Superintendent Gillis reported out after the last time we discussed this on what the basic framework that the district operates under around bullying. So there will be additional discussion on our March 10th meeting. So we'll
And
look forward to that.
She did, you're right, she did speak to that the last time, and that was what I was touching on. I said, well, we
Yes.
just talk about the policy versus truly understanding. You're dealing with a policy of which
So
you
we're
know little.
So
There's a
we're
lot
going
more.
to continue that discussion at our meeting on March 10th as a result of the various conversations around that.
I just find it ironic that we're talking about kicking this can down the road, and your main point about the masking was, what about kids that choose to wear it and whether or not they're bullied? I hope like heck no kids are. Nobody should have to be bullied. But it shouldn't be something we continue to kick down the road and have to have these conversations on. My son,
Your time, and as I indicated, this is on our March 10th agenda for additional discussion.
may I say one last thing? I got an email from my students, teachers, and guidance counselors that not only did my son hate school and was miserable, that he didn't love his life, everything at school sucked, and he wanted to die. I now have sleepless nights and nightmares of what that might be as I read about the little boy in Utah. So I'm going to continue to push and push and push.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we talked about last time, I think, when Mr. Marquis spoke to us, was is there any benefit in doing a survey? And I don't know if that's something that we can talk about tonight, so that we have that information when the administrators come back on March 10th. If we can, I don't know if I look at you or look at Ms. Brandt, but is that something that we can talk about offering to our district so that we can see true numbers of what parents are seeing from their kids?
Well, as Betsy said, we have an board agenda item on there, so whatever the board wants to talk about that night is what we can talk about.
So is that something that we can make a motion and talk about today? I'm talking specifically about putting something out to parents so that we have some true numbers when we speak about that again.
So I feel like I'd like the board chair to respond to that. I can do whatever you need me to do.
So as Superintendent Brandt indicated, we have it as planned on the agenda on March 10th. So that certainly could get a sense from administrators what they're seeing in their schools and move forward from there. One of the parameters that I think we would want to be careful with is exactly what we intend to gain for information from that survey and what it might look like. And perhaps Superintendent Brandt, with help from other administrators, could think about what that might look like and at least have some advice for us rather than assuming that we might throw something together now. That would be my suggestion.
So I guess the ask doesn't mean that we have to do it tonight, but the ask is that we make a decision. Does that make sense?
That any board member may make a motion at some point. I think it would be courteous to the folks that are left in public comment to let them finish up with that. And we have the opportunity to have other items of business as we move through the agenda. Folks, that's not helping.
No, you're trying to skip the motion.
The 9 folks that sit at this table get to offer up motions and take action as far as what they would like to see happen
And
for
you're
this board.
declining her motion. That's not
So
how
I
it
would be
works.
interested in listening to our next speakers at this point.
My name is Amelia Blay, and I'm from Turner, and my school is the Turner Elementary School. What I was going to say was that to me, masking makes no sense. Like, for example, I would use Walmart. They have as many people there as they do in school, and people there get to choose if they want to wear a mask or not. Why don't people at school get to make that decision too? The only place where people have to wear masks is school. You don't have to wear one in the store. It just doesn't make sense. So that is why I hope masking will be no more by the end of the week. Thank you.
Emily, you're a pretty fantastic speaker. I hope you'll join us on the board sometime. 'Cause I think that would be super helpful. Thank you.
She's getting ready. Good evening. My name is Casey Blay. I'm a resident of Turner. So, real quick, I applaud all the board members for making this decision this night for an immediate removal of masks and the option of masking. That's what we've been asking for 2 straight years. The science has shown that we're at that point now. In regards to Mr. Marquis' point, the chair, superintendent, and dean, I would start looking into the possibility, because between the COVID masking, the lack of children that have complained with issues in school, bullying, gross negligence is the one thing that I see written in front of this board and on the superintendent. Being in the Marine Corps, it stops from the leadership down. And when your leader sits there and follows just guidance and doesn't follow and listen to what their troops say, then that's a dereliction of duty. And I will tell you what, between how I've heard this board handle itself, it's specifically the chair handle itself this evening, I would be embarrassed. And again, with Mr. Marquis' issue, gross negligence, there is 1,000 lawyers out there, 1,000, that would take on any case of gross negligence towards any children. I thank you to all your board members that stood up this evening. I applaud you. God bless. Good night.
My name is Crystal Whitmore, and I am from Leeds. I am a parent and an employee of MSAD 52. I came up here today with a little bit different standpoint, but since you voted, it's different. But my employment here is what 90% of you would say I would never do. And I would never do what you were doing, but 90% of you would say that you would never do the job that I do. And without the job that I do, most of you wouldn't have a job. I stand this low on the totem pole compared to many of you others, and I feel like I should be up here because I am a bus driver. I drive every one of your kids and everyone else's kids to school. Without my school bus and all of my coworkers, those kids would not be in school and you guys would not have jobs. From there, I want to say how difficult the last few years have been. As a bus driver and a bus driver trainer for everyone else, we stand and we train everybody saying that you always look at these students as giving them a smile and being polite. Well, they don't see my face anymore. I'm the first person they see before school and I'm the last person they see at the end of the day, whether they had a good day or a bad day. I can change that for at home or at school. With a mask on my face, it makes a huge difference for this age especially. They don't see my smile, they don't see my good morning, and I will tell you that the last 2 years, my good mornings have now become, can I have a mask, please? I don't get good mornings anymore. So it makes a change in my life and my job too. So I thank you for removing masks because it's going to make a world of a difference, and I think that's in the school buses, in the classrooms. A facial expression means a lot to kids, especially of this age. I mean, I'm sure the high schoolers that are out there really appreciate it as well, but this age especially. So I thank you for changing that. And I stand here for all of my coworkers who are not here and also are having a very difficult time, and many of which have thought about leaving at the end of this year because of masking, and it makes it so much harder. Behaviors have changed in a lot of kids. I've been here for 8 years, and I can tell you right now with this COVID change, behaviors have changed tremendously. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the masking. They're sick of it, we're sick of it. I'm a very tired bus driver. I do love my job, but I'm sick of the COVID stuff. So thank you, and have a great night.
Good evening. So unfortunately I missed the last meeting. A few meetings ago, you had, I believe it was Dean, speaking about whole air system, which I've been on since this past summer at some point. And there's a couple of things that were said. What was said is basically all of the procurements were followed, everything's hunky-dory. If you read the procurements, there are places in there that seems like everything was done okay, but in both your state and your federal procurements, it defers back to one thing that says these can be met as long as all state and federal laws have been fulfilled. The writing that comes out of the office for MSAD 52 says that any purchase over $100,000 must be set up to date. Another thing that was said in that meeting, this would have been the Zoom meeting, is that there was no other company that could do it in the time frame or the parameters that you were looking for. Understood. But if there was no other company, how would you know if you didn't have it out for bid so other people could tell you that they could do it in a lot amount of time? The other thing that was said is that it's proven to take care of SARS-CoV-2. Okay, that's the case. Whoever you purchase it from will give that to you in writing. If it has been clinically proven to be safe, effective, and kills SARS-CoV-2, they will put it in writing for you, and they will show proof that their company backs that product. And if that's all done, said and done, fine, perfect. A little bit of your background that you might want to do some research on. You can use Google or DuckDuckGo, whatever you want to use. Just put in needlepoint bipolar ionization lawsuits. There's a $300,000 needlepoint bipolar ionization system getting ripped out of Newark, New Jersey because it doesn't work. I already told you that I've got testing from a local school district using the same stuff, and it doesn't work there. Why would it work here? There's another district not far away from us that's using one. It doesn't work. It's not going to work here. So before these companies enter their lawsuits, and whatever literature that you might have passed on to other people saying that it takes care of SARS-CoV-2, you might want to have all your ducks in a row before these other companies are getting lawsuits turned on them. When this is all said and done, we're already in the tens of millions of dollars. I'm watching these lawsuits. We're going to be near the $1 billion mark before this is all said and done. And I'll leave it at you on this one. If they're not going to back it, they're not going to put it in writing for you guys to protect yourselves, you're on your own here. I'm just trying to help you. I'm trying to give you the heads up. I'm trying to get you to get some money to either use it towards something you need or purchase something different. The other thing that I want to speak to you about that I heard 3 times a few meetings ago was your social emotional learning program that you've got going on. That's the disguised name for CRT, which is critical race theory. I want to know that our kids are not being taught critical race theory. If that's something that you guys are putting into your programs, you can call it social emotional learning, which I heard 3 times. Tell me that program doesn't contain the same substance as critical race theory. I want to know what's being taught and what's not being taught when it comes to this. I would like an answer. Have a good evening. Critical race theory.
Jimmy Childs, please. Well, you know, I was a little pessimistic coming in here today. I thought that maybe what Ms. Grant said when she wanted to go with the 9th is what she was going to try to do. I'm very thankful and grateful for you guys standing up and doing it sooner because just a few extra days, you know, might be good for some people, but maybe good for these kids. I've been explaining that for a very long time. We've had a lot of good conversations. We agreed on almost everything, you know. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the educators and everybody for doing your job, you know. I'm here. I don't know if this thing's working now, but, I'm here for, like, these little kids. See, this kid's 3 years old, and if he was at daycare, you want this little kid to be masked up or in school next year. Masking these little kids, masking my son over there, it's heartbreaking. It really is. I've done a lot of research on this stuff, very informed decision-making research. I hope that if this opportunity comes before you guys again, you guys will do the same type of research, because it's been said all before, the masks don't work to stop transmission of viruses like that, airborne viruses. It's just true. And I want to touch on something I think this school really needs a resource officer instead of a psychologist. I was told by the sheriff here last time that this school really does need a resource officer. And with all these bullying things, my nephews deal with the same things with bullying. Whether they start to become a bully or they get bullied, I think it needs to stop one way or the other. And hopefully we can do something to change that. Because, like I said, we need to change things. I've been a father, this is the third time, so I've done this. I got a daughter that's going to be 24 years old, so I've been there, I've done all this stuff before a lot of people I can have. You know what I mean? I was 18 when I became a father. So now I got this little kid right here, so I need to do the best that I can for this kid. Like this People's Convoy thing that's going around with freedoms against mandates, that's a real thing, and everything that I've been doing here at this school is be fighting for our liberties. Our liberty is a real thing, and if these elites would have waited one more generation, they would have got us. But see, now people like me are awake, and I hope all of you other parents teach your kids about your Constitution and your freedoms and your liberties. Because I know I'm going to, because someday they're going to have to fight for it even more. And so I guess I just wanted to, and the mask thing, if you want to put masks back on the kid's face, I've done a lot of health science research, and I want to tell you something about breathing. Every cell in our body requires oxygen to survive. Higher oxygen levels increase function and are vital for good health. Many of the most effective natural treatments for serious life-threatening disease focus on oxygenating the cells. The easiest way to get more oxygen into your body and every cell of your body is to breathe properly, restriction-free. Proper breathing dramatically increases stamina, mental clarity, elevates your mood, and helps the body detoxify more efficiency. So every time you breathe freely, it's more healthy for you. So when you're not breathing freely, it's actually bad for you. And who profits if anything's bad for you? Big Pharma does. So I said it before, I'll say it again. So I thank you for what you've done, and let's stay the course.
Hi, my name's Matthew, and I'm 10 years old, and I go to Leeds Central School, and I get bullied a lot on the bus and at school, a lot at lunch and stuff. So I was wondering what you can do about that. What you can do as well to help out.
Thank you for coming and talking to us tonight, Matthew. I hope that you and your family are having conversations with your teachers and your principal as well in this process, and that's definitely why we want to hear from those folks at our next meeting so they can help us out to help folks like you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did. Anthony Shostak, Green, thank you for making masks optional. I'd like to just point out that you could have done this a long time ago. The data has not changed. The science has not changed. Public perception has changed. In an election year, the midterm elections are coming up. It's very transparent. That is the only reason that the CDC's recommendations have changed. Their recommendations are a vindication of all of the parents and children who've come before you for months asking for the policy to change. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Easton Harrington. I go to Leeds Central School. just thanking all of you for removing masks.
Anyone else interested in public comment? If not, I thank everyone for sharing their thoughts, and I would say with our young speakers tonight, we're in good shape to keep these conversations moving very well into the future. So thank you, folks, and I guess I would also like to thank all the folks in all of our schools, our buses, and our buildings for enduring pretty challenging times that I certainly don't pretend to think that any action that's taken this evening will magically make things less challenging. I think we've heard lots of stories about mental health challenges going forward, not going forward, that are here with us today. So anticipate lots of conversations about those and creative problem solvings. All the while understanding the reality is that there's lots of different influences out there alongside the school. So hopefully our conversations can be included with those things. That brings us to old business, of which Jessica. Circle back to the beginning of.
So I was waiting for the rest.
Yep, and so we have an other, 10.5 other for any other items of business. So board members could certainly make a motion then if they wanted to. So we don't have any old business. That brings us to the consent agenda. Do we have a motion for the list? Richard, do we have a second? Second from Yuri. All those in favor? Unanimous. That brings us to new business. Item 10.1 is a discussion of high school lacrosse. If folks remember, we had a parent that spoke to us at our last meeting about this, and as our practice is to follow up when questions are asked, this is an opportunity for Mr. LaRoche and Mr. Shaw to share information on previous conversations that have occurred prior to the parent joining us at our last meeting, and perhaps shed a bit of light on the context around that.
All right, so a couple of things to go through here. Mr. LaRoche and I, as you pointed out, Betsy, are here to talk about lacrosse, follow up on comments that were made at the last board meeting. And I would be remiss if I didn't just point out that these are strange conversations to have, because I feel like I'm standing in opposition to my students, and that's not the case. So I want to put that out there, that this level of awkwardness is there. But nonetheless, we're here to talk about where we currently are with lacrosse. Mr. LaRoche is here to support and answer questions as we have, but I've got the lion's share of the role here tonight. As many of you know, this is not new. As recently as March of 2020, I corresponded with the board around this very same topic. As it's come up again, we followed the same process we have in the past, where we have considered the information that we were given. We followed up on that information and sought out additional information from other schools and have made decisions in the best interest of our school and our athletic programs. Although the request may seem fairly simple and straightforward, it's ultimately not. It's a small part of the much more complex overall athletic program. And even in the short time since I last corresponded with the board about lacrosse, the circumstances around it specifically have changed, while at the same time a lot of the bigger picture items haven't. So specifically with lacrosse, just 2 short seasons ago, Edward Little was only willing to allow our students to participate at the JV level. Now, because of their own dwindling numbers, they're willing to consider a cooperative agreement that would allow our students to play at the varsity level. It's rumored that this could happen as quickly as this spring at no cost to our district. Although unlikely, it may be true that it could potentially happen this spring at no cost. What's certain is there will be both a fiscal note and supervisory expectations starting next year. Now you may wonder how I know that to be certain. Well, this isn't our first rodeo with cooperative teams. We've been here before. We have an extensive history with them, and we know how this goes. I also know that we wouldn't enter into a cooperative agreement with another school without expecting some level of support from them. As such, we can't expect any less from ourselves. Additionally, this isn't something we can say we're going to do for a couple of short years and then let it go. It will immediately become part of what we do and an expectation moving forward. Again, this may sound simple enough, but we know from experience that cooperative teams are difficult to manage and require an investment of resources, particularly time, but also financial. Also from our experience, we know that we need to take time for the serious consideration of whether or not we truly want to get involved with additional cooperative teams as we move forward. These agreements aren't seamless, and they require as much or more attention as the activities that are ours alone. Continuing to add additional responsibilities onto the athletic director without an increase in support for that particular role is not sustainable. Just a few years ago, we spent almost an entire school year investigating the role of the athletic director. We looked at our programs as they compared to the number of programs at other schools and the various levels of support that those athletic directors have in place. Of the 22 local high schools that we heard back from, we're one of 6 schools that offer 25 or more varsity programs. But we're the only one of those 6 schools that do not provide some additional level of support for the athletic director, whether that be an assistant, a secretary, or in many cases both. Just to highlight a few aspects of that role, whether it's a cooperative team or ours alone, a varsity program requires supervision of the coaching staff, supervision of game day procedures, and league and scheduling meetings, MPA committee meetings, coordinating transportation, and undoubtedly a never-ending rescheduling of weather-related cancellations. All of which are time-consuming endeavors. When we talked about this last, I spoke of us being at a tipping point. Best case scenario, we're balancing on that tipping point. Unfortunately, I believe we've passed that point, and we're already in a position where in the very near future, we're going to need to be looking at providing additional support for Mr. LaRoche in the athletic program. Also to consider, we are not obligated to offer all available interscholastic activities. We're not the only school that doesn't offer lacrosse, and lacrosse is only one of several that we do not offer. We have had inquiries in the recent past regarding volleyball. It's girls volleyball, it happens in the fall. We've had inquiries around tennis, and more recently, we've had inquiries around esports. I'm going to mention this later on, but esports is probably the fastest growing interscholastic activity in Maine and maybe across the country. And it has a great deal that goes with it, but it comes at a high price tag to get started. Anyway, it is understood that we want to provide as many opportunities for our students as possible, but I think it's important to note that for our size, our district currently offers a very diverse athletic program. In order for us to continue to do that, we must consider each inquiry carefully and in a larger context of the school and district. One of those considerations has to be the impact on existing programs. Our number of students interested in athletics is a finite number. While we may bring in 1 or 2 new students with a new program, ultimately most of the participants will come from existing rosters. Whether that's volleyball in the fall that would impact field hockey, girls soccer, and cross country, or lacrosse in the spring that would impact softball, baseball, track, additional offerings will likely negatively impact existing programs. This is not some nebulous suggestion. It's something that we've seen play out right here with our own programs. When we added indoor track, we impacted some of our existing programs. And we've also seen it play out in many, many schools around us. Some of the information that we gathered in looking at it in this particular case, Mr. LaRoche reached out to approximately 26, not approximately, he reached out to 26 schools. He heard back from 19. 5 of the schools he didn't hear back from don't have lacrosse, so I'm not surprised he didn't hear back. Several of them indicated that they saw negative impacts to existing programs. There's also information about size of programs. For example, there are currently, of the 19 that responded that have lacrosse, 6 of them are part of co-op teams. An additional 6 of those 19 are looking to be co-op teams. So in the immediate or very near future, 12 of the 19 programs that exist are going to have to exist in a co-op team. Also, an important consideration, and one that cannot be discounted in any way, we must closely monitor our Title IX obligations. We are currently in what appears to be a very good situation regarding Title IX, having similar numbers of offerings and providing similar amounts of support for both male and female athletics. However, if we add additional opportunities for boys to play lacrosse, we are obligated to provide similar opportunities for girls. This is not something that we can sit back and wait for girls to come ask us about. We will have to do it immediately. If we find ourselves in the middle of a Title IX audit, like other schools around us have recently found themselves, we need to make sure that we are in compliance. I also feel compelled to share that if we were to move forward with adding lacrosse, at this point, I'm going to move forward with requesting full funding for our existing programs. We have several that the board has elected to take on at partial funding levels. Those include alpine skiing and boys and girls hockey. Additionally, our programs that are considered fully funded rely heavily on booster organizations for support for needed equipment and supplies that are beyond what the school district provides, and this includes uniforms. Our district has not budgeted any funds to purchase uniforms for our athletic teams for at least 15 years. We're very fortunate that these expenses have been covered through the generous support of our various booster organizations. Additionally, as other requests for activities come in, and they undoubtedly will, Mr. LaRoche and I are very likely to look at adding them as we move forward. This will most certainly include esports, which I mentioned earlier. I've also mentioned that we're going to need to be looking at additional support for Mr. LaRoche. As I mentioned, what seems to be simple ultimately is not. As you already know, there isn't any one decision that we make at a board meeting or in this district that happens in isolation. The quick response of, sure, let's do this, fails to take into consideration the complex system of moving parts associated with the athletic program, the school program, and the district. The long-term solution will be for me and Mr. LaRoche to continue working closely with Mrs. Grant and consider each request as it comes in the context of our overall program and how any additional reductions ultimately impact the overall school and district. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Yes?
I have a couple of questions. How many co-op teams do we currently have?
Yep, we co-op, I want to get this right, Mr. LaRoche, we co-op for hockey, both boys and girls. We co-op for swimming and that's it.
Okay. And then how many boys and girls do we have interested in lacrosse? Do we have a number?
I believe we have a number of 3 or 4.
3 kids.
4. No, there's more.
There is more.
I got 4 hands that I see right now, and a chorus of more.
Okay. And they're all boys that are interested right now?
There's
I don't
one
believe
girl.
I've heard from any young ladies.
Okay.
That I know of.
That's all I have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Mr. Shaw? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Why are we only offering 2 sports in the spring, but all other season offers 3 or 4? So you're saying that baseball is depleting, so our children are affected by that because they choose not to play baseball, so they can't play a sport they've been playing since they were in 2nd grade. I've been fighting this since my son was in 8th grade. And I got told, why did you let your son play a sport that we didn't offer at the high school? Because it's a sport that he could potentially have gotten a college scholarship for. And now he only plays 1 sport here.
So I can't speak to why we are only offering the current spring sports, because they're the ones we've offered since, I think, forever.
Other questions for Mr. Shaw? Mr. Markey?
That's what, if we were to do this, we would have to do that.
Edward Little has offered.
Yep, and that's actually, just for background purposes, Mr. Shaw's presentation tonight is a follow-up on some information that was offered in public comment last time around interest around lacrosse and co-op opportunities. I'll go with the white hat first.
How much kids do you have on the co-op swim team for EM?
6.
6 kids?
Yep.
And one of them just broke the record at EL, right?
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay. Laroche, one of your arguments was that you said that you didn't think that the parents would like us playing varsity sports for EL, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so what did you say?
What I said is that in order for us to co-op with Edward Little at the varsity level in a cut sport, they would expect us to give financial and supervision of that sport. And yes, if we're displacing Edward Little kids on this co-op team at the varsity level, that's potentially a cut sport, that there would be people who would not be happy about that, which is why we would have to make it a varsity co-op and not just individuals joining them, which is what the swim team originally was. Swim team's been an existing individual co-op for us for at least a decade. We reached the number of 6 this past year, and that's when the MPA says you either have to have your own team or create a co-op. So a co-op was created for swimming with Edward Little at that point. It's something that had been in place for over a decade.
Okay. Can I follow up on that one?
There were, yes, please.
So what I didn't get into is the detail of my previous correspondence with the board a couple of springs ago was around the suggestion that it was similar to swimming. At the time, I mentioned that if our numbers increased with participation in swimming, that the expectation from both Edward Little and the Maine Principals Association would be that we entered into a cooperative agreement. Up until this point, and I believe it's closer to 20 years, to be honest with you, that we've had students swimming in EL. Up until this season or the end of last season, we had been around 4 or 5 athletes. This year we're at 6, which is the circuit breaker for requiring co-op status. So that's what got us to the official cooperative team with EL in swimming. And not dissimilarly to what has happened in other cases, as soon as that happened, there was an expectation of some contributions. Our contributions this year have been pretty much around providing transportation, which has, again, historically proven to be one of the things that our district tends to take on is transportation, because other districts are having even harder times providing bus service. So that's not a pot that we can continue to reach into and pull buses out of. Eventually, that's going to dry up.
Thank you. I think we had other folks that wanted to speak. I'll go in directly behind the white hat and then the other young man.
So you guys had said that transportation's a problem. If we supply transportation on our own, then that wouldn't be a problem. And then also to go back on the swimming team, you guys had said this has been something that's happened for the last 20 years with EL?
It's been happening for a long time. Prior to this year, students they were Levitt students, they just happened to swim with the EL team.
Okay, because I emailed Mr. Larage, and he had told me there was no money in the budget for any type of lacrosse co-op or any co-op. And then not even a week later, there was an Instagram post by the EL swim team that says, Edward Little and Levitt area high schools are now officially co-op for their swim team. I had screenshotted that and sent it to Mr. Larage asking, just curious on how the school has the funds for a co-op with EL for swimming, yet none for lacrosse, when I was just told there was no funds at all for any type of co-op.
can't speak to any conversation you may or may not have had with Mr. LaRoche, but what I can, I'll just reiterate what I had just said. When the season started with EL, I don't even believe that we were considered a co-op at the start of the season. It happened midway through the season. And there wasn't, and there currently still isn't funds budgeted for swimming. Those are being requested in this upcoming 22-23 school year.
Thank you. Did somebody else with a question? Yes, sir.
So this, like I said last time I was here, we started this early December, and in the MPA it's 3 months before the first game of the season. This can is getting kicked right now, even last year before COVID. I know Felicia's been at it. Why can't they just play this year JV? I don't care if it's their stats are on the wall. I don't care if they get a gold ribbon. I don't care. Why not just vote for that? Just let them play this year. If it's a 2-year contract for the MPA, revisit whatever happens after that happens. I just don't see why this year. I know there's a lot of logistics, but that's what you guys say on paper and all that stuff. But you guys blocked me so hard from EL to getting any information. The coach won't call me back. I have an assistant coach that I personally work with, and he's like, we need the numbers. We need Bo and Maddox. They know these boys. They're special. Just, let's do this. I mean, I get it. The buses are free. They know it. You know it. The coaches, do you go to every single swim meet? Who goes to these?
I do not go to every single swim meet. I'm not going to.
Okay, so
I think Mr. Shaw has answered some of those questions from the logistical standpoint of what you and Mr. LaRoche have learned from EL as far as what parameters they might expect. Is that something you might reiterate at this point?
I personally have not spoken with the administration at EL. I believe Mr. LaRoche has. And my understanding, and I don't want to speak for him, so I'll let him do it, but my understanding is that we likely could enter into an agreement to start this season. And although officially there would be no request for financial support, I'm certain there'll be a request for supervisors' assistance. And very likely there will be requests after the season gets started. They will looking for assistance with transportation. Jumping into the next season, there will definitely be expectations on how this goes. And historically, or typically how this goes is one team or one school, or if you're in 3 schools, you divide it by 3, or however you want to do it. One school will fund the varsity coach, or one school will fund the JV coach, or you'll take the total and split it in half. And then you'll also take transportation costs and split it in half. And you'll take supervisory expectations and split them in half to make sure that things are equitable. Because if it's going to be a co-op team, then it's going to be co-op expectations. And that has the way it's been done with our other programs, and I would expect that that's what will happen next year with this one. I don't think it's possible to do it for 1 year. I just don't. It's not fair to the kids. It's not fair to EL to say that we're going to have our kids come down for a year and do it. If we're going to do it, as I said in my initial remarks, it immediately becomes something that we do. And I know from experience, and many of the people at the board know from experience, that once you start doing an activity, undoing an activity is a major ordeal. Whether it's 1 student that's participating or whether it's 12 students that are participating, there's no good way to stop because it's again, it gets back to the fairness thing. If the student starts playing lacrosse as a 9th grader, and then when senior year rolls around, we kind of pull the rug out from underneath them, we have an even more difficult conversation to have. And I'm not, like I said when I started, I hate to stand here and do this because I feel like I'm arguing with my kids, because that's not what I want to do, but I do want to lay out how this will go.
Thank you. I think we had another question up back.
Yes, Mr. Losh. So
my daughter went through all through Ashley, and fall sports, there's definitely competition. It's hard to fill some of the teams, you know, the rosters. But in the spring, track is like 80 kids because they have they have nothing to do. I mean, my daughter was all academic, and she went all the way through, and she was like, well, I guess I'll do track because there's really nothing for her to do. I mean, she played, you know, softball from 5 years old to middle school, but then she just didn't want to do it anymore. But I don't know as though there's really going to be that much competition come spring. Yeah, they're drawing from track, but I mean, there's 80 kids. You know, I think co-op is an option. You know, fall is different. That one's tough because you really are. There's so many teams, but in the spring, I can say that my daughter, all academic, she had nothing to do in the spring, so she just did track because that's what they did.
So I'll ask to hear from somebody we haven't heard from before, and I think that would be the lady directly in front of me, and then I'm going to look to board members to see if we have somebody that's looking to make some sort of action, because we can't really kind of continue the discussion for forever.
So I have a two-part question. The first part is in regards to the financial aspect of this. My son has played for the Kennebec Cannons out of the Augusta-Winthrop area, and the coach, his kids go to Winthrop, and they were telling me that Winthrop School does not pay Mirandacook for the kids to play lacrosse there and to co-op. The kids actually, with the team, they raise funds to cover those costs. And the second part of my question is, you said that the swim team, you had a few individual students who just went and swam with them. Why can't that be the case with lacrosse?
The expectation isn't the same with the traditional team sports as it is with the more individualized sports. That's the difference.
Okay.
And Betsy, as far as the kids raising funds to participate, we are a little bit on that road, but have been down that road before extensively with hockey. I believe that the sense that I've gotten from the board in the past is, for the most part, if a team's going to be ours, then it should be ours.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you. Brooke?
I have one more question, I'm sorry. There was mention of if they provided their own transportation. Is that something that's able to happen? I'm not sure policy-wise if that's an option.
That's a great question, because it puts us into we've put ourselves into some weird territory. Because typically speaking, we have students, so for example, our home hockey rink is down at the Norway Savings Bank Arena in Auburn. If we have a home game, we don't provide transportation for our students to get to Auburn. But if we have an away game, we provide transportation from the Savings Bank Arena to wherever we're going. Okay? If we're talking about like baseball, for example, students are expected to ride the bus to and from events. Practice is easy, it's right outside. Similarly here, if we were talking about practice with EL, students would be expected to get themselves to practice. As far as games are concerned, we have not had students funding their own transportation to get to contests.
Okay, is that a policy thing, like they're not able to, or I guess I don't know.
I believe it's more of a practice.
Okay.
So at this point, unless there are board members that are looking to do something different from what Mr. Shaw has described to us, at this point, we should move on to the balance of our agenda. Thank you, folks, for discussing this evening, and I would think that this discussion around the totality of our extra and co-curricular offerings would continue when we get to that warrant article and what the actual financial aspects of many of these programs are. So we'll look forward to discussing that further then. Thank you, folks, for joining us this evening.
Can I just say one quick thing, ma'am?
Yes.
We're out of time. That's why we need to know. Like, I don't know if there could be a vote or anything. That's why.
Yep. So, and that's exactly why I asked board members if there were board members that were interested in doing something different from what Mr. Shaw has responded at this point. So at this point, my understanding is Mr. Shaw has indicated that we simply don't have the capacity to add that co-op. So, thank you. So that brings us to item 10.2. Item 10.2 is to report the completion of the probationary period for the following employees. Amanda Cole, TPS Special Ed, Ed Tech 3. John Guy, TMS Special Education, Ed Tech 2. Alicia Judd, Levitt Area High School, Halftime Library, Ed Tech 1. Brooke LaChance, TMS Special Education, Ed Tech 2. Nancy Peterson, TPS Pre-K, Ed Tech 2. Chelsea Pratt, GCS Office Support Assistant. Audrey Spear, TPS Special Education, Ed Tech 3. Erica Valancourt, TMS Food Service Specialist. So item 10.4 is a request for an executive session, and we do have, I believe, indication that there was interest from board members in other business. So unless there's an objection, I would move to item 10.5, and that would be any other items of business we need to take up tonight. Jessica.
Thank you. So I really do think we need to at least push for, I'm going to make a motion that we talk about and have prepared a survey for our next board meeting. So I think that gives us a chance to make the decision that we're going to do that, but it also gives our admin time to come up with an appropriately worded survey. So my motion would be that we put together or make, I'm stumbling tonight, but that we can make the motion that we'll do a survey, but not put the specifics on the table tonight. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a second for that?
I'll second it.
Joanne seconding. Brooke, did you have a question?
So Jessica had mentioned doing a survey to parents, which is awesome, it's great. Is it possible to include the students as well? Because there are several students who don't talk to their parents about this. I mean, like higher level, high school, middle school people who, don't necessarily tell their parents about issues at school. And I'd be interested to see the students' responses as well. If that's
Teresa?
I was actually going to ask if we could also include staff in that survey. I think their voices are very important as well. And I know several staff members have, I just think it would be really important if we had their voices as well. I think that there are a series of school climate surveys that we could look to do. I think one of the things that I would ask that we consider is what is the purpose of the survey, and then what might take place. So I do feel like we can really come up with some good ideas. And Brooke, thank you for mentioning students. I was going to as well.
yes, yeah.
So we have a motion with a second, and the motion is to and make sure that I understand this, Jessica, simply to make sure that we have a survey prepared to discuss as part of our discussion on the 10th.
Right.
Okay. So that's what the motion is, and I think Teresa makes a great point as far as board members should make some indications this evening as to what our expectations what do we hope to get out of the survey, like what's our purpose. I mean, I think it would be disingenuous of us to say we're going to put out a survey to see if there's any bullying. I mean, I get that. Like, I don't think any of us, dude, I'm the geeky fat kid. I know bullying's not new, and then it's been here for a long time. So I think simply asking, are you experiencing bullying, or is an oversimplification. So I do think it would be wise for us to discuss further what we hope to gain by the survey. Mr. Markey?
Yeah, thank you. I think if you want to know my intent in asking initially here, was more along the lines of prevalence. Like, at what level does it take place? And I agree asking the staff and asking the teachers and administrators makes sense, but I really, really think you also need to include the parents and the students, because there are a great number of kids who either don't or don't have the good home life where they talk students aren't bringing it to their attention. So it really does need to be all-inclusive. From my perspective, it was, yes, we know it exists, but at what level are you really seeing it, like the true prevalence? Then you can make a plan to deal with what's there. Otherwise, you're throwing darts and you're hoping you get it.
Thank you. Other thoughts from board members on what, Joanne, and then we'll get the young man in the back.
Okay, two things. I just looked quickly online, and there's all kinds of bullying surveys online. I didn't look at them, but it should be quite a job to put one together, but there's plenty of ideas there, I think. I also think it's important to start with a definition of bullying, or try to figure out what the definition is that the different people you're surveying are dealing with, because there's lots of degrees, and I know some kids that think they're being bullied constantly, and I know some kids that really have reasons to, and I think you need some sort of definition to define what you're looking for.
The young man up in the back. I would just like to add to the whole lacrosse thing. I know you said that you guys have heard enough, but my name's Joe Martin. I'm from Leeds. I've played since 5th grade, and at 5th grade, like, that time frame was really hard because I was a 3-season athlete, and baseball was just getting too slow, and I wanted a faster paced sport, and I had found lacrosse, and I think my 6th grade year, my mom had emailed Mr. Larage. I know he's not here, but he had told us that it was all to do with the interest in baseball. And he said that it would take away interest in baseball, and that they didn't want to do that because our baseball numbers were slowing down. The freshmen that just came up from middle school this year, I know a lot of them, I'm good friends with a lot of them. Big baseball team, the 8th graders coming up next year, a really big baseball team. Half of them go play in Waterville during the summer. And even letting a few of us, the few that were here, the few that one of my good friends plays, there's a couple of friends that I used to have that play. I know a few girls that play. There's not going to take that much interest away from baseball to affect that. And I had gone to Mr. Larage and Mr. Shaw about that, and they told me that at this point that's not a problem. It all comes down to the budget. I had emailed someone on the school board, the representative in Leeds, and they had told me that that shouldn't affect us because it's not that much of a problem. My mom had reached out to the athletic director of Oak Hill. One of my best friends played with Oak Hill. He stopped playing a couple years ago. I have a friend now that has played with Oak Hill. We've talked to the athletic director there. He says it's not that big of a deal. It all lies in the hands of Mr. Larage. Bo and Maddox were here. I know Maddox's dad has gone to the MPA. Felicia has gone. She's reached out to, I think it was 207. I had looked into the main muscles, but that's a big commitment. It's in Falmouth like 5 days a week, and that's just not something my family can do. Whereas lacrosse, we've always been able to do, and I don't see how it's that big of a budget problem that we can't do it. Like, if there's fundraising that needs to be done, there's no reason that we couldn't do that.
Thank you, Joe. Other thoughts on bullying survey and what we hope to gain from that particular item from board members? Yuri?
One thing that would be interesting to me is to know when people felt that they were having that happen, right? Is it at recess? Is it on the school bus? Is it in the classroom? To kind of identify narrow down maybe where some of the problems are.
Teresa.
So I will say that we belong to, it's called Swiss Suite out of, sounds kind of funny, but it's PBIS apps, Positive Intervention, Behavior and Sports. I think I have the letters in the right order. But they have a platform, and we've administered the school climate surveys, and I believe they have one for parents, and I just think Joanne's right, we can find a bunch of surveys. I can tell right now that when reports come to at least the administrators that use this, which is the 4 elementary schools and the middle school for sure, and I know Power School, you can, the behaviors are tracked in there, that you ask where they are, so like we can run specific reports seeing where the behaviors are happening. So I think that's a good point too, Yuri. Where are they happening, time of day?
Thank you.
I think I have a good tool for us to use.
Excellent. Richard, you're reaching for the microphone.
I'm willing to bet that everybody in this room has been bullied in one form, shape, or other at some point during their school careers.
It's not the same.
Other comments from board members on what we hope to gain from the survey, so we managed to give our administrators some feedback on that. Brooke?
Just one thing I would want to touch on would be if it is, it might be hard to measure, I'm not sure how to process it in my mind right now. If it's one kid that they're being bullied by, if it's multiple kids they're being bullied by, if it's, you know, someone who is known to bully. I know my nephew has had issues with the same kid consecutively, and so have other students with the same kid. So I don't know how we would assess that, but maybe, you know, include a question, is it the same kid, is it different kids, like, you know, kind of like that aspect of it too.
Anyone else hoping to weigh in on this one? Yes,
I
sir.
think some of the answers that she had just said comes from the gentleman's comments that you need to survey the kids. You're not going to get the answer from all of their parents. Some of them don't have good home lives. Some of them don't talk to their parents. You got to ask the kids. It has to be individual. It has to be private. It needs to be anonymous.
Which is what I mentioned too earlier with
Excellent
surveying
points.
students.
Yep, excellent points on that. So just to recap what I've heard as far as the survey aspects, certainly want to survey students, staff, and parents. And I think the suggestions around not having an expectation that here, let's sit down as a family and fill this out, that folks would have the ability to fill that out as individuals there. Certainly that the information that we would hope to gain from this would include where and when this is happening, both from an age standpoint, like from a physical location standpoint or school standpoint as well. And that it sounds like there are resources out there that can assist us in this. Jenna, did you have?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think it's really important to also make sure that we differentiate between the in-person bullying and the cyberbullying piece of it, the online bullying. I know as an administrator over the last, I'd say probably 5 to 10 years, like the increase in really, really unkind and often bullying behaviors has, it's increased a lot, but a good majority of it happens outside of the school, and as administrators, we spend a lot of time and energy then looking into it at the school level. Because it falls into our jurisdiction, obviously, if a student feels uncomfortable coming to school. But sometimes it's bigger than just us, so I'm willing to do the work and to dig deep. I'm just asking that we also consider looking into some things that support parents also working with us to monitor the social media piece, because it's the biggest piece of the bullying right now.
Thank you. So I guess Teresa and Kim, does those various discussion points provide some direction as far as what would be helpful for goals around the survey? And I appreciate in advance the work that I'm sure will go on in creating that and bringing that forward for discussion on the 10th. And I'm certain this is not a simple discussion, that at the end of the discussion on the 10th, there's going to be an aha moment that that's exactly the one solution to this. So I would anticipate that this would be an ongoing set of conversations that we learn as we go. We do, from a housekeeping standpoint, we do still have a motion on the table that we need to vote on here at some point. So all those in favor of creating this survey to discuss on the 10th? Those opposed? Unanimous, so we'll include that in our discussion on the 10th, and thank everybody for their thoughtful comments around that, and look forward to additional on the 10th. Anything else for other business that we need to take up before we move to an executive session? If not, I would entertain a motion for item 10.4, and that's a request for an executive session to discuss compensation of officials, appointees, employees pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A. Richard, do we have a second from Yuri? All those in favor of entering executive session? Unanimous. We will do just that. Thank you, folks, for